I'm in charge now. 2 weeks and you're out. That's what Ethan, the CEO's son, said across the acquisition table like he'd just announced the winner of a raffle at a county fair. 29 years old, hair slicked back with too much gel, a smirk pasted on like it had been practiced in the mirror. He thought that sentence would shatter me. Instead, I smiled. Not the polite smile you give at a company dinner when the salmon is undercooked. Number. The kind of smile that comes when you've seen a storm building for months, and you know the thunder is about to hit someone else's roof. The room went quiet. The buyer's executives shifted in their chairs. One of them, gray suit, steady eyes, the kind of man who looked like he could smell weakness across state lines, set down his pen and just stared. Another tapped the corner of their phone, as if making sure the recording was still running. I didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I just let Ethan enjoy his little performance, because I knew something he didn't. See, Ethan thought this was his grand moment, the coronation of the heir. His father, the old CEO, had stepped back after a health scare. Ethan walked in with a fresh badge, a fat title, and zero understanding of what actually kept this company alive. To him, operations were boring. To me, operations were oxygen. For 8 years, I'd been the one patching holes, smoothing vendor relationships, and keeping compliance threads from unraveling. Payroll, audits, logistics, all the invisible gears that keep the machine turning. I'd built most of them myself. Ethan thought cutting me loose was his way of proving he could lead. He had no clue that the same 2 weeks he just granted me would be the last 2 weeks of his career. But let's pause here, because I know some of you listen to these stories while cooking dinner, scrubbing dishes, or rage, walking around the block with your headphones in. All right, back to Ethan. The smirk, the power trip, the boy who thought he was a king. His PowerPoint was open on the big screen behind him, the title slide stuck on something he must have thought looked visionary. Core Vista 2.0, leaner, meaner, smarter. He even added a tagline at the bottom, "The future is us." I wish I were kidding. The buyers, 4 executives from a private equity firm called Hallberg and Company, sat there like professional poker players. Unblinking. They hadn't flown in from New York to be dazzled by Ethan's catchphrases. These were people who could smell rot before the rest of the room even knew the lights had dimmed. And Ethan? He was wrought with cufflinks. Kelly has been helpful in the past, he continued, pretending to honor me while dismissing me in the same breath. But it's time to streamline leadership. Fresh ideas, young energy, aggressive expansion. 2 weeks, that's all I was worth to him. He didn't even glance at me while saying it, as if I was already erased from the building's directory. What Ethan didn't know, and what made the buyers' side eyes so delicious, was that for the past month I'd been quietly working with their due diligence team. Not begging, not scheming for revenge, just answering their questions, cleaning up Ethan's messes, forwarding the right documents when they asked for them, highlighting risks he didn't even understand were risks. I wasn't trying to save myself. Honestly, I was exhausted. But I wasn't going to let the company I'd built piece by piece collapse under his ego. And collapse, it almost did. The day Ethan showed up with his shiny new badge, he called an all-hands strategy huddle. No agenda, no notes. Just him standing at the front of the room in a designer suit, telling us we were going to disrupt silos and redefine synergy. Within a week, legal couldn't find signed contracts. Finance couldn't get approval on disbursements. IT was locked out of systems Ethan swore he had access to. He thought master access was a vibe. I kept things alive. Vendor negotiations, compliance filings, payroll schedules. I wasn't sleeping much. I was tired in ways coffee couldn't fix. But I wasn't ready to watch the company sink just because the boss's son wanted to cosplay as a visionary. So when the buyers reached out, not formally, just a quiet email from their VP of integration, a woman named Dana, I didn't give them speeches. I didn't whine about Ethan. I just sent them structure. Clean, dated, documented processes. The bones of the machine they were about to purchase. That was the turning point. And that's why, When Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, smirk plastered on, telling me I had 2 weeks left, I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't flinch. I just smiled. Because what he'd just announced to the buyers wasn't my farewell. It was his. And buried in a contract he hadn't even read, on a page he never knew existed, was the reason his smirk wouldn't survive the month. The first week after Ethan's grand announcement was chaos disguised as leadership. He strutted around the office like he'd just bought the building with his allowance, telling anyone who'd listen that Core Vista was entering its golden era. Meanwhile, the golden era looked a lot like unpaid invoices, confused department heads, and a dozen frantic phone calls hitting my desk every morning. I kept quiet. Not because I was powerless, but because I'd already learned something important. Fools burn themselves faster if you just hand them the matches. Take finance, for example. Quarter-end disbursements needed approval. Routine stuff. Normally handled in 2 signatures and a quick compliance check. Ethan, eager to prove he was decisive, told the team he'd streamline the process. His new method? Ignoring every email and writing "circle back later" in the subject line like it was a magic spell. By the 3rd day, vendor payments stalled. One supplier even drove to headquarters demanding answers because their trucks weren't rolling without clearance. I found Ethan in the break room, laughing with one of his friends from college, now suddenly our strategic transformation officer, and explained the gravity of the situation. He waved me off. "Kelly, maybe if you focused less on doom and gloom and more on adaptation, we wouldn't have these problems. Relax. We're innovating." I didn't argue. I just walked back to my desk and quietly forwarded the vendor contracts to Dana, the VP from Hallberg and Company. I highlighted the deadlines Ethan had missed and flagged the penalties we'd incur if nothing changed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't complain. Just the facts. 10 minutes later, Dana replied with 3 words. "Noted. Thank you." That was the first crack. The second came from IT. Ethan had bragged during his all-hands that he had master access to every system. The truth? He couldn't even reset his own password. When the compliance dashboard locked out the entire audit team, Ethan told them to just work offline for now. Offline. For a department managing federal reporting requirements. I stayed late that night, restoring access through the admin credentials only 2 of us had. I didn't tell Ethan, but the buyers noticed. Because the next morning, an email landed in my inbox, CC'd from Hallberg's legal team, asking for confirmation on our compliance timeline. My name was on the request, not his. That's when I realized my silence was starting to speak louder than his noise. Still, Ethan kept performing. He ordered a full company rebrand, complete with a new logo designed by a friend's girlfriend in Photoshop. He replaced our professional vendor management system with some flashy SaaS app he found on LinkedIn, convinced it would save costs. Within 48 hours, invoices disappeared, W-9s went missing, and our procurement lead nearly quit on the spot. I documented everything. Every missing file, every delayed approval, every Slack thread where Ethan told people to stop overthinking while projects bled money. I didn't run to HR, and I didn't gossip. I just quietly built a record, piece by piece, because I knew one day soon someone would ask the right question. And when they did, I'd be ready. One night, close to midnight, my inbox pinged. It was Dana again. "Do you have any continuity framework in place if leadership transitions further?" I stared at that line for a long time. Continuity framework. That wasn't a casual question. That was a buyer wondering if the person holding the keys knew how to keep the ship afloat without the captain. I didn't hesitate. I sent over the document I'd been building for months. Vendor scorecards, risk assessments, renewal timelines, disaster recovery procedures. Not fancy, not polished, just clean, bullet-pointed bones of the machine. Her reply came less than an hour later. "This is gold. We'll keep this between us for now." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen in an empty office. That was the moment I knew things were shifting. I wasn't just the woman Ethan dismissed as ops. I was becoming the bridge the buyers actually trusted. Meanwhile, Ethan kept digging. He copied Hallberg's executives on emails where he took credit for 6-month plans I'd built. He bragged about innovative initiatives that were nothing more than recycled templates I'd drafted years ago. And when deadlines slipped, he blamed legacy processes, as if the systems he barely understood had somehow betrayed him. The buyers didn't call him out. They didn't need to. They just kept watching. And I kept documenting. By the end of that second week, the tension in the building was thick enough to taste. Vendors were restless. Employees were whispering. And Ethan was still parading around like a king without a crown. He thought he was in control. But what he didn't realize was that every misstep, every delay, every smug dismissal was pushing him closer to a cliff. And I wasn't the one shoving him. He was running full speed toward it on his own. I just made sure the buyers had a clear view. Because in corporate wars, it's not the loudest voice that wins. It's the one with the receipts. By the start of the third week, the shift was undeniable. It wasn't dramatic, not some boardroom explosion with lawyers storming in. No, it was subtle. The kind of shift you only notice when silence starts speaking louder than words. Ethan's emails were still long and full of buzzwords. Synergy, disruption, growth mindset. But the buyers weren't replying, at least not to him. They were replying to me. It started small. A CC here, a quiet ping there. Then, one afternoon, I opened my inbox to find a direct request from Dana. "Kelly, can you confirm the timeline for vendor onboarding under Scenario B?" I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't say, "Can you ask Ethan?" It said, "Kelly. My name, direct. Clear, no middleman." That was the moment I knew they'd stopped seeing Ethan as a leader. He was background noise. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the email to show anyone. I just answered. Clear, factual, professional. And that answer opened a door I didn't realize had been waiting for me. By the end of that week, I was invited to an informal alignment call. The calendar invite didn't even list Ethan. Just me and 2 Hallberg executives. 15 minutes off the record. I almost didn't accept. I'd spent years keeping my head down, doing the work without chasing the spotlight. But I clicked accept anyway. The call was simple. They asked about our compliance roadmap, about how vendor renewals were handled, about risks if leadership churned again. I didn't editorialize. Didn't badmouth Ethan. I just answered what was asked, point by point, as cleanly as possible. When the call ended, one of them, Alan, sharp suit, calm tone, said quietly, "Thank you, Kelly." That was exactly what we needed. That was the second shift. Because after that, the questions didn't stop. They grew. First once a week, then twice, then nearly daily. Always precise, always directed at me. And every time I answered, I could feel the ground tilting a little more in my favor. Meanwhile, Ethan was still busy playing CEO. He hosted innovation brainstorms in the break room with kombucha and beanbag chairs. He ordered a rebrand campaign with fonts he'd found on TikTok. He told HR to scrap half the reporting protocols because they were too old school. He thought he was steering the ship. He didn't see the iceberg. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I opened my inbox to find a document from Hallberg's legal team. No message, no explanation, just a file. Core Vista Transition Staffing Draft. I opened it cautiously, expecting vague placeholders. But there it was, buried halfway down the page. A blank line labeled Continuity Lead. No name yet. Just a seat waiting to be filled. I flagged it. Dragged it into a folder I'd started weeks earlier called Just in Case. Because I knew one way or another that line would matter. And then came the third shift. It happened in a meeting Ethan wasn't supposed to invite me to. A system audit review with Hallberg's integration team. He didn't want to attend himself, so he forwarded me the invite with a quick note. Just cover this. They'll only ask about boring stuff anyway. Halfway through the call, Alan asked a question Ethan wouldn't have been able to answer in a million years. Do you have clean vendor onboarding metrics for the past 3 fiscal years? I could hear the pause, the kind of silence that would have exposed him instantly if he'd been on the call. I didn't hesitate. Yes, you'll find them in the second tab of the Ops Metrics file I shared last Thursday. Line 42 onward includes late cycle recovery factors. Silence again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was respect. Thank you, Kelly, Alan said, and the call moved on. Afterward, a message popped into my inbox. Would you be open to a short side-channel briefing on continuity risks? I didn't reply right away. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Because this wasn't just answering a question. This was stepping into a role I hadn't been officially offered. But in the end, I typed back one word. Yes. That's when the real transition began. The next briefing turned into 3. Then 4. I never speculated. Never complained. I just delivered data. Clean and undeniable. Contracts, metrics, risk reports. By the third call, Halberg's team had stopped treating me like a source. They were treating me like a leader. And then came the question that told me everything had changed. Kelly, if there were an ideal role for you post-close, one that ensures continuity and minimizes risk, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. Interim COO, Transition Americas. Not permanent, not flashy, just accurate. 2 days later, I received another draft document. This one wasn't blank. The line labeled Continuity Lead was filled. My name. Box checked. I sat there in the dark office, staring at the glow of the screen. My heart didn't race. I didn't cheer. I just felt a calm certainty wash over me. Ethan thought he was running the show. But the buyers had already written me into the script. And when the curtain lifted, he wouldn't even realize he wasn't the star. He was the punchline. The week before close felt like standing on a metal bridge and listening for the faintest vibration. Everything looked steady from the sidewalk. Underneath, the bolts were loosening. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy hosting Transformation Thursdays in the break room. White butcher paper, flowcharts, cucumber water, slogans, and dry erase marker. Meanwhile, legal was pinging me about audit trails, finance was chasing approvals, and procurement was nursing a queue of invoices that couldn't route because the lean vendor system Ethan installed didn't support our compliance fields. I kept doing what I'd been doing for months, answering questions without flair and keeping receipts without commentary. The buyers kept watching, and then they stopped pretending not to. It started with a meeting invite. The title used to read Leadership Transition Review. One morning, it landed in my inbox as an update. Post-close executive realignment. No explanation. Same time, same room. New subtext. That afternoon, HR forwarded me a draft statement they wanted to prep for optional use. I've read a lot of these. Polite sentences that smudge edges. This one was different. Kelly's leadership has been instrumental in preserving operational integrity during this period. Her forward-looking frameworks position Core Vista for continuity post-close. I read that last line twice. Post-close. HR doesn't write post-close unless someone higher has already said the quiet part out loud. Ethan signed off on the draft within minutes. He CC'd me with a thumbs-up emoji and a note. We'll polish this for your farewell next Friday. He really thought he was writing my eulogy. That evening, long after the building went dark, I opened a file I'd been ignoring. Core Vista Transition Staffing Agreement. Final draft. It had been sitting in my inbox for 2 weeks, sent by Halberg's counsel after a flurry of late-night calls. I hadn't read it because I already understood the bones of the plan. But something about that retitled meeting nagged at me. 73 pages, charts, schedules, signature blocks. I skimmed past the noise until I hit the thick of it. Definitions, authorities, sign-off paths. And then, there it was. Page 14. 3E Transition Staffing and Continuity Oversight. All staffing decisions affecting operational integrity during the transition phase must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead. This authority cannot be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the board. One more line, unadorned, sitting there like a fuse. Continuity lead, Kelly M. Dwyer. No bold, no italics. Just my name, tucked into the paragraph Ethan had initialed in the margin with a sloppy EH. I sat back in the empty conference room and let the sentence settle. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a gift. It was a lever. The buyers hadn't argued with Ethan. They'd simply removed the part of the machine he could touch. I highlighted the clause and forwarded the document to my personal archive with a single subject line. Just in case. Then I printed page 14 and slid it into a plain manila folder. Paper has a way of silencing noise. The next morning, Ethan blasted a company-wide email with the subject line, "Exciting next chapter, Core Vista x Halberg." The body was a collage of MBA phrases and future-ready mindset pep. He thanked everyone for embracing change and promised a seamless leadership transition. I stared at the word seamless. He had no idea what it meant. 5 minutes later, a short message popped up in my chat. Not from Dana, from the buyer's CEO. We had never exchanged a direct message. Bring your card tomorrow. No emoji, no preamble. 4 words that said everything. I typed the only reply that felt appropriate. Understood. That afternoon, I did something ordinary. I walked to the print shop on the ground floor and ordered a small run of cards in matte stock. Clean type, no flourish. Kelly M. Dwyer, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Americas, Halberg and Company. The clerk cut them with a steady hand and slid the stack across the counter like he was passing along a quiet verdict. I put one into a slim case and tucked it into my bag. Back upstairs, Ethan was holding court with his strategic officer, brainstorming a rebrand that replaced our risk sign-offs with emojis. He waved at me through the glass like we were old friends. I waved back. There's a special kind of calm in knowing you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. The day before the meeting, procurement escalated. 5 critical vendors frozen in the system because Ethan's new platform didn't support W-9 verification the way our auditors required. Legal was ready to light their hair on fire. Ethan responded with, "Let's not overreact. Innovation looks messy." I sent Dana a tidy, time-stamped packet. Change logs, access requests, Slack threads, and the remediation plan I'd already staged. 10 minutes later, she replied, "Received. Thank you." No one looped Ethan. That night, I packed my bag like I was getting ready for a trip. Notebook, contract copy, 2 pens, the card case. I slept finally, the kind of sleep that comes after months of bracing your shoulders against doors other people are leaning on. Morning broke with the humorless light of a conference day. Someone had set out branded folders and sparkling water. HR parked themselves on the left. Halberg's team took the right. Still, precise, practiced. Ethan strode past my chair and nodded at the table as if it were his stage. He didn't see the manila folder under my hand. He didn't see that the stage directions had already changed. On the way in, Dana brushed past and placed a yellow sticky flag on my copy of the agreement. No words, just a small tab, the kind you use when you know a page matters. Page 14. Ethan cleared his throat, rolled his shoulders, and started his speech. We're aligned, we're lean, and we're ready to turn the page. He thanked the teams, name-checked a spreadsheet he'd never opened, and gestured toward me like a museum docent. And of course, Kelly will transition out over the next 2 weeks. I didn't correct him. I just reached into my bag, felt the cool edge of the card case, and waited for the buyer, CEO, to look up. Almost time. Because consequences don't arrive with sirens in corporate life. They arrive in footnotes, in signatures, and in the moment someone finally reads page 14 out loud. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Folders lay neatly stacked, water glasses filled halfway, pens aligned like surgical tools. Halberg's executives sat in their practiced stillness, not a smile, not a frown, just that steady poker face patience. Ethan stood at the head of the table, shoulders square, tie too tight, eyes shining with the certainty of someone who thinks they're about to be crowned. "This acquisition," he began, pacing like he was auditioning for a stage play, "marks the next evolution of Core Vista. a smarter, sharper, more agile future. And I'd like to personally thank everyone who helped us get here, including Kelly, who will be transitioning out over the next 2 weeks. His voice carried confidence, but the words felt hollow, like a drumbeat echoing in an empty hall. Bryce, the so-called transformation officer, clapped. HR nodded politely. Someone typed something into their notes app. And then, silence. I didn't bow my head, didn't force a smile. Instead, I reached slowly into my bag, pulled out the slim case, and slid one card across the polished table toward Halberg's CEO. Matte black. White ink, clean font. Kelly M. Dwyer, interim COO, Transition Operations, Americas, Halberg and Company. The CEO picked it up, glanced at it, and for the first time all morning, his face shifted. His lips curled into laughter. Sharp, sudden, delighted. Not cruel, but the kind of laughter that bursts out when a punchline lands in a joke you didn't even know was building. Ethan froze mid-sentence. Something funny? He asked, voice cracking at the edges. The CEO didn't answer. He tilted the card toward Alan, seated to his right. Alan read it, smiled. Not a smirk, not a politeness, but a knowing grin, and slid it back. Then, with a deliberate hand, Alan opened his binder, flipped straight to a page marked with a yellow sticky flag, and laid it flat on the table. Page 14. Mr. Harrison, the CEO said calmly, perhaps you should revisit the staffing agreement you signed. Ethan blinked, confused, scanning the page like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the paragraph, lips moving as he mouthed the words. Continuity lead, Kelly M. Dwyer. His signature sat at the bottom, crooked and careless, the ink that sealed his own fate. No, he stammered. That's not binding. She's not. Dana leaned forward, voice even. It is binding. You initialed it. Final approval on all operational staffing falls under Kelly's authority for the next 90 days. The room went quiet. You could hear the click of a pen, the faint hum of the air vent. Bryce shifted uncomfortably, staring down at his phone like salvation might arrive in a text message. HR suddenly found the wood grain of the table very interesting. The CEO tapped the page once with his finger. You granted this authority yourself, Mr. Harrison. Consider your 2 weeks reassigned. Ethan's face drained of color. He looked from me to the page, back to the CEO, as if the walls might crack open and swallow him before the humiliation set in. His hands hovered above the table, twitching slightly, like a man reaching for a crown that had already been melted down. We've arranged a new role for you, Alan added smoothly. Facilities operations, Kansas City branch, night shift. They could use help with forklift scheduling. It was over. Not with shouting, not with fists on the table, but with the soft finality of a signature already written weeks before. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I simply accepted the small envelope HR slid across to me. Inside, a badge with Halberg's logo. My name, my title, interim COO. The clip snapped into place on my lapel with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than Ethan's entire speech. Thank you all, I said, standing. I look forward to getting started. No one objected. No one interrupted, because it was done. I walked toward the door, my heels steady against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard Ethan's voice, small, cracking. Wait, she reports to you? The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look up from the contract. He just smiled, slow and deliberate. No, Mr. Harrison. For the next 90 days, she is me. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I left Ethan standing in the ruins of his self-made empire, drowning not in noise but in the one thing he'd never accounted for: consequence. And that's the truth about power. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes all it takes to end a career is a single card slid across a table. They didn't even use the word fired. Just a security guard at my elbow, a new manager with too much hair gel, and a single sentence that sliced through 17 years of my life. Your role no longer aligns with our forward strategy. That was it. No thank you. No recognition, not even a handshake. Just the kind of corporate jargon people use when they don't want to admit what they're doing. I smiled, nodded, and let them escort me out of the glass tower I'd walked into at 7:15 every morning for nearly 2 decades. On the surface, I looked calm, maybe even relieved. My coworkers avoided my eyes, some with pity, others with barely disguised smirks. But inside something shifted. Because while they thought they were cutting out legacy overhead, they had forgotten one detail. A single clause buried deep in the contracts, written in plain legal ink. Without me, every single operating license this company depended on was void. I kept that knowledge tucked behind my smile as I handed over my badge. It hadn't always been like this. When I first joined the company, we were a scrappy little biotech startup trying to prove ourselves. Compliance wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential. I handled the paperwork no one else understood. Federal operating permits, export licenses, medical device certifications. I made sure every shipment, every contract, every regulatory audit passed without a single red flag. 17 years later, I wasn't flashy. I didn't have Darren's gleaming suit or Madison's TikTok confidence, but I was the spine that held this whole organism upright. The one who wrote the systems people mocked as overly detailed, but relied on every single day. That's the thing about quiet people like me. We don't need applause. But when we're gone, the silence we leave behind is deafening. The firing itself was staged like theater. The new manager, Greg Whitfield, leaned against the HR desk like he was auditioning for a commercial. Early 30s, MBA fresh off the printer, voice polished by too many podcasts. We're streamlining, he said, flashing his perfect teeth, focusing on innovation, cutting out the old bottlenecks. We need agile systems, Alice. Not rigid gatekeeper's gatekeeper. That's what he called me. I wanted to laugh right there in his face, because what he didn't realize was that I wasn't a gatekeeper. I was the gate itself. Without me, there was no entry, no approvals, no legality. But I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just smiled, signed the paper he slid across the desk, and watched as HR stamped terminated effective immediately. As security walked me out, I remembered the clause. Section 12B, tucked into the operational compliance agreement I had written myself years ago when the company first entered regulated markets. It was my insurance policy, one I never thought I'd actually need. In the event of involuntary termination, all federal certifications and licenses sponsored by the company shall remain under the employee's name until properly reassigned and approved by governing agencies. Translation: fire me without planning and every license collapses. And Greg? He hadn't even glanced at the old contracts. That night, I sat in my small apartment with a glass of tea and the city lights spilling through the window. My phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues. Some apologetic, some nosy. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my personal terminal, inserted a secure USB, and logged into the National Licensing Database with my biometric key. One by one, I checked them. FDA device compliance, authorized under Alice M. Hayes. Export certification ID, authorized under Alice M. Hayes. Federal biotech handling permit, authorized under Alice M. Hayes. 32 active licenses, all tied to me. They hadn't transferred a single one. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat steady. They thought they'd erased me from the building. But on paper, in the eyes of the federal government, I was the building. By Monday morning, I knew chaos would start to brew. I could already picture it. Vendors sending error messages, shipment delays, internal systems rejecting new credentials. The compliance dashboard blinking red instead of green. And at the top of it all, Greg standing there with his polished smile, wondering why nothing worked. When I closed my laptop that night, I didn't feel vengeful. I felt certain. They had treated me like background noise, like outdated infrastructure. But tomorrow, the silence would roar louder than any speech Greg could give. Because here's the truth about betrayal in business, or in life. People think it happens in a single moment. A firing, a slammed door, a final word. But betrayal is slower than that. It's built on years of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Until one day, the person you thought was expendable reminds you why you needed them all along. And me? I didn't need revenge. The system itself would speak for me. I could almost hear it. The hum of idle monitors, the clatter of early keyboards, the low murmur of voices before the day truly began. For 17 years, I had lived inside that rhythm. Now, the rhythm would falter without me. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Jules, one of the junior analysts who had always been kind to me. Something weird. Shipment to Metatron flagged. License ID not valid. They're asking who the officer of record is. I set my coffee down slowly. One license error wasn't surprising, but I knew better. If one was failing, more would follow. By 9:30, another message. Two vendors can't process orders. Same error code. Greg told us to just update the license info, but the portal rejected it. I pictured Greg standing there in his fitted blazer, telling everyone to keep calm. He probably thought it was a small glitch, the kind of problem IT could patch. He had no idea he was staring into the mouth of something much larger. Around mid-morning, Jules called me directly. Her voice was tight, like someone trying not to be overheard. "They're panicking, Alice. Orders are stacking up. Darren's in the conference room saying it's just a transition hiccup. But the compliance portal keeps spitting back the same error. No authorized certifying officer found." I didn't answer right away. I listened to the sound of her breathing, the edge of fear in it. She had always respected the systems I built, unlike most of them. "Jules," I said finally, calm as I could manage. "Check the Federal Registry. Look up who the licenses are still tied to." She hesitated. "You mean, yes." A beat passed, then a soft gasp. "They're all still under your name." I thanked her quietly and told her to be careful. Then I ended the call. By noon, the cracks widened. I knew because another message arrived, this time from an old colleague in logistics. "We can't move inventory. Customs flagged the export certification as invalid. Trucks are sitting in the lot. Greg wants to override it, but Federal Portal won't allow it." My hands stayed steady, but I felt the weight of what was happening. Without those licenses, nothing moved. Not the devices, not the raw materials, not the paperwork. The company wasn't just delayed. It was paralyzed. I imagined the boardroom, the rows of young analysts shifting uncomfortably in their seats while Greg barked orders. He probably told them to stay innovative and not worry about outdated protocols. Meanwhile, every system I had built for 17 years was blinking red. That afternoon, I decided to walk. The city felt different when you weren't rushing to the office. People hurried with phones pressed to their ears, taxis honked in tight streets. But for me, there was no urgency. I bought a sandwich, sat on a park bench, and let the noise of the world wash over me. My phone buzzed again. Jules, of course. "Alice, you won't believe this." The FDA showed up for the Q3 inspection. 3 auditors right in the lobby. Greg nearly turned white. "They're asking for portal access. No one can log in. Darren tried your old credentials. The system flagged it as fraud." I closed my eyes for a moment. The FDA inspection. Of course, it came every year around this time. I had always prepared the team weeks in advance. Now, without me, they were walking blind into it. By 4 p.m., the story had reached me without even trying. A former coworker texted, "What did you do?" "The company's on fire." Everyone's saying nothing works without you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That evening, I sat by my window again, the city lights shimmering against the glass. For the first time in months, I felt no weight on my chest. No deadlines. No urgent calls. Just quiet. I knew tomorrow would be worse for them. The audit report would land, shipments would stall, vendors would escalate, and sooner or later, someone higher up, the CEO himself, would return from holiday and see the wreckage. He would ask the only question that mattered. Who thought firing Alice was a good idea? I took a slow sip of tea, the bitterness grounding me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. They had dismissed me as legacy overhead, background noise unnecessary. But systems don't care about ego. Licenses don't care about charisma. And the truth was simple. I was the license. By Tuesday morning, the silence broke. My phone buzzed with 3 messages before I even finished breakfast. Vendors demanding updates. Colleagues whispering about auditors refusing to proceed. And one message from Jules. The CEO is back. He looks furious. I set my spoon down gently. I had expected this moment. Callum Vance didn't like surprises, especially not ones waiting for him after a holiday. I remembered him well. Sharp suits, sharper eyes, the kind of man who built the company by sheer force of will. He wasn't cruel in the way Greg was, but he was dismissive. To him, compliance was background noise. Necessary, but never glamorous. I had been invisible to him. Just another cog. Now he was about to find out what happened when the cog wasn't there anymore. Later that morning, Jules called me, whispering as though she were hiding under her desk. You should have seen it, Alice. He walked in with his suitcase still in his hand. No one even greeted him. The whole floor was silent. He went straight to the conference room and slammed the folder they gave him on the table. I pictured it. Callum, suntan still fresh, confidence peeling away as he opened the internal dashboard for the first time since his return. They pulled it up on the screen. Jules continued. All red. Every license marked invalid or revoked. He asked Darren what he was looking at. Darren tried to spin it as a transition error. Callum cut him off. He asked one question. Which idiot thought firing Alice was a good idea? I couldn't help it. I laughed. Quietly but fully. By noon, the damage was undeniable. The FDA auditors had left the building, filing their inspection as incomplete due to credential denial. Shipments were frozen in loading bays. Clients were calling, demanding answers. Another message popped up from a logistics manager I barely knew. We're dead in the water, Alice. Without you, we can't move a single product. Everyone's pointing fingers. Nobody wants to admit who signed off on this. I didn't reply. It wasn't my fight anymore. Around mid-afternoon, the storm worsened. One of the analysts forwarded me a screenshot, knowing I'd appreciate it. An internal Slack thread with Darren frantically typing, "Is there any way to restore Alice's license privileges temporarily?" The silence under his message said everything, not a single reply. No one knew how to fix it. No one could. The irony was sharp. Just days ago, Darren had called me legacy overhead. Now he was begging, even if only in digital desperation, for my name to be restored. I went for a walk again, this time down by the river. The water was steady, unbothered by the chaos in offices stacked with glass and steel behind me. I thought about how many nights I had spent working late, making sure every renewal was filed on time, every regulation accounted for. No one had seen those hours. They only saw the clean dashboards, the approvals that slid through without hiccups. That invisibility had cost me my job. But now, it was the very thing unraveling theirs. By evening, another message came through. This one from Graham Niles, Director of Operations, a man who once laughed openly at my color-coded compliance maps. Alice, it's Graham. Listen, we may have miscalculated. The licenses are gone. We need you back, at least temporarily. Just to stabilize things, I stared at the text. The words blurred by memory. Years of dismissals, years of being the afterthought in meetings, years of being cut out of the big picture. Now, the same people who smirked at me were scrambling. I didn't answer. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights low, City sounds muffled beyond the glass. For the first time in 17 years, I didn't feel tied to them. I wasn't bound by their deadlines or their arrogance. But I knew one thing. Tomorrow would be worse for them. The audit report would hit. Clients would begin to back away. Investors would notice. And all of it would trace back to the decision made in one smug conversation at an HR desk. They thought they could erase me. Instead, they had erased themselves. By Wednesday morning, the cracks had turned into fractures. I woke up to 3 emails from former colleagues, all with the same undertone. Panic. One wrote that the export division had shut down entirely. Containers locked at the docks because no valid license could be attached to the paperwork. Another admitted their biggest supplier had frozen all deliveries until a recognized compliance officer signed off. The third was short, almost desperate. Alice, if you know anything we can do, please tell us. Everyone's drowning. I didn't answer. It wasn't mine to fix anymore. Around 10 a.m., Jules called again. Her voice carried that strained mix of disbelief and exhaustion. You should see it here. The CEO's holding emergency meetings every hour. Greg hasn't been seen since yesterday. Some say he's locked in his office. Others think Callum pushed him aside completely. Darren's still trying to make it sound temporary, but even legal is against him now. They keep saying it could take weeks, maybe months to reestablish all the licenses I stayed silent. And Alice, she added after a pause. The board is furious. Investors are asking questions. Clients are threatening to walk. Callum actually said out loud, "We fired the wrong person." I don't think I've ever seen him admit something like that before. That made me laugh, though it wasn't joy. It was irony. For years, I had sat in rooms where my warnings were brushed aside, my work treated as invisible. Now, the man who never once acknowledged me in a meeting was telling the board they'd made a mistake. By afternoon, I started seeing the fallout outside company walls. 2 industry blogs published short pieces about regulatory disruption at Neuroflux. They didn't mention my name, but the timing was clear. A few clients quietly updated their websites, removing Neuroflux's logo from their Trusted Partners page. I knew what that meant. In biotech, perception is everything. If clients and investors sensed weakness, the company would bleed faster than any internal failure could cause. That evening, Graham called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the arrogance he once carried like a badge. Alice, he began, I know we didn't always see eye to eye. I know I dismissed your systems more times than I should have. But I'm asking you now, not as a director, not even as a colleague, just as someone who's watched everything fall apart. Will you help us? I let his words hang in the air. For a moment, I thought of the nights I'd worked late, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the years of giving everything to a company that had shown me so little in return. Graham, I said finally, you don't need me. You need to understand why I mattered in the first place. Until you do, nothing I could do would change what's happening. He tried to argue, but I ended the call. Later, as the city grew quiet outside, I opened my laptop. Not the company one they had taken from me, but my personal machine. I scrolled through job offers I had ignored for years. Smaller firms, rival companies, startups looking for stability. One name stood out. Helix Core. I had spoken to them once at a conference years ago. Back then, I had stayed loyal. Now, loyalty seemed like a relic. Their message was still sitting in my inbox, weeks old. We admire your work. If you're ever ready for a change, our door is open. I read it twice, then began drafting a reply. On Thursday, word reached me that the FDA had officially marked Neuroflux as failed in their inspection. The report cited absence of valid certifying officer and multiple revoked licenses. The consequences were severe. Fines, legal exposure, possible suspension of operations. Jules sent me a screenshot of Callum in the boardroom, face buried in his hands while legal and operations argued across the table. They're finished without you, she wrote simply. For the first time in days, I let myself feel something close to relief. Not satisfaction at their collapse, but relief that I was no longer carrying the weight of keeping them upright. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, darker than I usually liked it. The street below buzzed with life, people hurrying to dinners and late trains. For years, I had been chained to a system that only valued me when it was convenient. Now I realized I was free. The company had underestimated me, erased me, and in doing so, erased themselves. And as I pressed send on the reply to Helix Core, confirming a meeting for the following week, I knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something I should have done a long time ago. By Friday morning, my apartment felt lighter. I'd slept through the night for the first time in months. Helix Core had replied within an hour of my message. A brief call that turned into a 3-hour conversation about risk, process, and how you build a company that doesn't collapse when one person leaves. They didn't ask me for secrets, shortcuts, or access. They asked me how to do it right. We agreed on something simple and clean. A short-term advisory contract starting Monday, pending a full-time offer after references and compliance checks. Realistic, respectful, legal. They sent over paperwork the same afternoon. I read every line and signed. By noon, Neuroflux was everywhere online. Not in headlines, just in the places that matter. Procurement bulletins, vendor forums, regulatory lists. Inspection failed, licenses revoked. Temporary suspension pending remediation. 2 clients publicly announced a pause in partnership pending certification continuity. They didn't name the company, but anyone in our space could read the map. Jules called after lunch. Darren's been reassigned. Project liaison. No clearance. Greg hasn't returned to the floor. Callum fired off an all-staff note about rebuilding our trust with regulators and respecting the expertise that keeps us compliant. You were the subtext of every line. I thanked her and kept my voice steady. How are you holding up? She exhaled. Tired. Angry. But I learned more this week than in 2 years. I'll never treat the quiet parts like background again. That landed. Quiet parts, the ones you notice only when they're gone. At 5, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it pass, then answered. Alice, it's Callum. His voice didn't bother with small talk. I'll be direct. We made a mistake. I approved a mistake. We need you to come back, even temporarily. Name your terms. In another life, maybe I would have wanted that sentence. Recognition, urgency, a hand outstretched. But I'd already made peace with leaving. I can't come back, I said. Not as an employee. And not to undo a choice you made on purpose. He was quiet then. Is there any legal way to accelerate reauthorization? No, I said. There's only the way. The same way I did it every year. Training, exams, interviews, registration. Weeks, not days. That's the point. It's supposed to prevent exactly what happened to you. He didn't argue. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry. I heard you asked who fired me, I replied. You already know where to aim the apology. He let out a breath that sounded older than he was. Good luck, Alice. You too, I said, and meant it. Not for his sake. He'd survive. But for the people who didn't choose any of this. On Monday, I rode the elevator to Helix Core's 21st floor with a temporary badge clipped to my sweater. No fanfare, no tour, just a neat conference room and a small team waiting with notebooks. Camilla, the junior analyst leading the session, had highlighted half the printout I'd sent over the weekend. She opened with the question I wish someone had asked me years ago. If we had to run tomorrow with 2 people out sick and 1 on leave, what breaks? Good question, I said. Let's build around that. We drew the map that morning. Who holds what authority, where the backups sit, where procedures live, and how they're tested. We wrote contact chains that were actually usable, not just diagrams for slide decks. We documented the boring things, the dates, the renewal windows, the audit prep checklists. And then we spaced responsibility so no single person became a single point of failure. I insisted on one more rule in writing. The person who keeps the company legal will never be the cheapest line on the budget. At lunch, I walked 2 blocks for soup and ate it in the sun. I checked my phone once. A LinkedIn notification had climbed past the point of politeness. I changed my profile line to 4 words. Compliance advisor, Helix Core. No speeches, no thread, just a fact. By midweek, 2 former clients messaged privately. Short, careful notes about continuity and trust. I reminded them I couldn't discuss neuroflux and wouldn't. They appreciated that more than any pitch. Respect is a currency, and you spend it slowly. That same afternoon, Jules sent a photo of the neuroflux lobby. The glossy sign dimmed to a reflection, a clipboard at reception with a visitor log that read the same name 3 times, Regulatory Enforcement Unit. Beneath it, a handwritten note on the guard's desk. No unescorted access to compliance or export areas. It was the right policy. I wish they'd learned it for a different reason. That night, I finally let myself feel everything I'd been moving past. The years, the dismissals, the tiny ways people made a person disappear while still using her work. I cried. Not long, not loudly, but enough. Then I washed my face, made tea, and laid out the next day's agenda. Internal training at 9, draft of Helix's annual audit calendar at 10, a one-on-one with Camilla at 2 to talk about her certification path. On Thursday, Helix's dashboards turned all green for the first time under my watch. Not because we cut corners, but because we didn't. We scheduled the renewals, we assigned backups, we ran a small tabletop drill for, what if the officer of record quits tomorrow? Everyone laughed at the scenario, then did the work anyway. That laugh is the safe kind. The kind that comes with respect, not denial. Friday afternoon, I took the long way home. I passed the old building without stopping. Through the lobby glass, a delivery sat unopened by the security desk, paperwork taped to the side. Hold. No valid certifying officer. It was not revenge. It was gravity. Back in my apartment, the sunset cut a warm line across the bookshelf. I wrote a short note on a sticky and pressed it to the edge of my monitor, the way I always had. In case they forget. The invisible work is the work. I'm not the only one who needs the reminder. Jules texted one last time before the week ended. I'm interviewing next week. Your checklist saved me today. Good, I wrote back. Carry it with you. Make sure the next place earns you. I closed the window, set my phone face down, and let the quiet arrive. Not the silence of being overlooked, but the kind you choose. The world kept moving. So did I. And for the first time in years, I wasn't holding anything together except my own life.